Greetings, productive programmer. So in our previous lesson, we polished up storing the comments to the stories. So now when we post a comment here, they are being stored to the story, but they're not displaying. So now we just need to display these stories. And the way that we can do this is we can come into our application. And again, this route here, this stories/number route, is we're going to take the Heeks file that this is in, and we are going to put the comments onto this page. So this is located in the lib blog web, and it's under our LiveView component, Story Live. And if you remember, we have been working with the one that's titled Show HTML Heeks, and that's where we inserted this comment form. Now, if you ever forget where a route is, just remember that you can always go back to under the lib blog web router, and you can just look up the route and you can get the module, so Story Live Show. So if you ever forget, just use the router as a reference to locate your way back to where you need to edit a file. And I use that all the time. So I don't have some mysterious knowledge of knowing where everything is per se. I do use the router quite extensively. All right, so in this module, this is where we're going to display the comments. I like this title body name. I like this list that gets generated here. For starters, we'll go ahead and we'll just list out our comments using this structure that Phoenix LiveView gives for us by default until we refactor our code. So again, just focusing on functionality before we refactor our code and make it look pretty. So I'm going to need to create stories. So I want to basically list out, the comments here. So I want, the user's message to be here, and this will be, a comment, and we want to have multiple items kind of like this. So yeah, that looks like a good starting point. So when you post a comment, they'll appear here like this. Now we already have comments being stored to the story, so I'm definitely saving, and we know that was successful from the previous lesson. So we're just going to make them display here. The way that we can do that, we can take these list items and we can say for each one of the stories, we're going to display or each one of the comments, I should say. So for each comment that we get from our story comments, we are going to just go ahead and display the comment message here. So it's going to be the comment message. And we need to put that inside of the appropriate syntax, so that way this will get displayed out onto the page. So it's going to be the comment message. And there you go. And just remember, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this before, but sometimes it trips people up that you need to have this equal sign if you want this to appear on the page. If you don't do the equal sign, that'll really confuse you. So just remember that it's left bracket % equals. And then when you close it, you just do % right bracket. All right, so let's see if this is functioning. All right, we have an error. It says that ecto association, so there is no comment association. That's okay. If you remember with how we associated our users to our stories, we got the same message before, and it was just because we did not preload the data. So it looks like we have to do the same thing here. When we get our stories, we need to preload all of the comments into the stories if we want to be able to access them here through the stories structure. So what we're going to do is we're going to locate where we are loading our stories, and we are going to just preload the comment message. And with Phoenix and the structure that it provides for us, it allows us to make a pretty good guess. We can guess that since this is a story, we're probably going to need to go to our lib folder, to our blog, and inside of our stories context, that is where we handle interacting with the database. So our stories context is going to get all of the stories. So wherever we are getting our stories, we are going to need to preload those comments. So when we come to this show endpoint, we are actually grabbing one specific story, so story number 2. And so this is coming in. So I can actually trace through the logic just so it's absolutely clear. If we go into the side of the show module, where we have our ID being passed into here. This ID is going to be the one that's being passed to the browser, so stories 2. So we take that ID and we actually do get story, and we get the story by the ID. So it's this code here, this exact call, this get story call inside of our stories context that is grabbing the story. So we are currently preloading the user. We also, in addition to preloading the user, we need to preload the comments. So we're going to preload the user and we're going to preload the comments. And if we do that, I think actually we're going to get another error because I don't know if we've set up. Okay, so we did set up the association. So let me just mention where my thoughts were, because there was probably a good reason, and you need to be aware of this in case you missed it in the previous lesson. So our code is functioning, but I actually, thinking back here, just trying to recall, let's go look at our comments schema. You see, okay, so we did say that they belongs to the story. Okay, so that's functioning okay. And if we go to the stories, I'm just looking at, I just want to make sure these relationships are good. And they obviously are because it's working, but I'm just looking here to make sure that we set this up before. So we also said that it has many comments. So yeah, this is why it's already functioned out of the box. These associations are set up. And my initial thoughts was, we might get an error because those associations were not fully set up, but thinking back in retrospect, okay, yes, those were taken care of. So a lot happening here in our application, and it's currently functioning. But just if you had any errors with those comments being able to be pulled down and being able to be accessed by after you preload the comments, then you just need to make sure that you are in fact building those relationships between the comment and the story. And we are taking care of that already in our previous lesson. So perfect. So we are good to go. And you can actually see the comments are being generated here. Let's make a new one, a new comment. This will actually be in real time. So if we do that, look how quick that is. So Phoenix LiveView, they don't call it LiveView for nothing, right? So this is LiveView. Awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. All right, so that's really cool, but let's not get too hung up on it. We could also do one more additional thing. So I wanted to showcase in this lesson something interesting, which is our comments. They are related to a story. And what we would like to do, though, is if we look at this, the comments are being created anonymously right now. Basically, if I come in here, it doesn't matter who I'm logged in as. When I make a comment, these are just kind of anonymous comments. This could be from anyone. And if we go back to our comment here, we only store a message and a relationship to a story. So if I come here into Postgres and I make a query to our comments, you can see that our comments are only associated to a story ID. We probably need to associate these comments to a user, so that way our comments don't remain anonymous. We want to have somebody be responsible, and we want to make sure we know who actually posted this. So what we can do is we can say that this comment here will belong to a user. So we're going to do belongs to, and this is also going to belong to a user. And so it'll be blog accounts and it'll be users. So this is very similar to what we did with the stories. So the story belongs to a user and our comments also belong to a user. Now they could be different situations, right? So the person who, the user, so if there's a story and it belongs to user Bob, the story can belong to user Bob, and there can be a comment on Bob's story from user Alice. So these users could be different. This is just a relationship between the comment and a user and a stories and a user. Hopefully that's not too confusing. If you have some database experience, then it probably makes more sense if you've worked with a relational database before. But do note that it doesn't mean that these are related to the same user. Basically, this comment can belong to any user, and this story can belong to any user, but it doesn't mean that the user that makes the story or the comment has to be the same person. Okay, so now that we have that set up, we can see if, we're going to need to make this function, I suppose. So now when a user, looks like we have an error here. So it says that, oh, right. So we just added this new relationship here. So we have to recreate our database. We have to run a database migration. Okay, so no worries. We're going to migrate our database. So it would have been good if in hindsight, if we thought about it, we could have actually created this user association. So when we ran our Phoenix LiveView generators and we did Phoenix Gen Live and we built the comments out, we created a relationship to the stories. So here's the command that we previously ran. We told Phoenix LiveView to make a relationship between the story ID and that it references stories. We should have probably also done users or user ID and had it reference the user, but that's kind of in hindsight, right? So in hindsight, we should have done that and it would have made our lives easier. But this is good, actually. I kind of like this. I'm glad that I made that mistake or didn't think about that ahead of time when building the application. It's not necessarily a mistake, but it's good to know, right? You might build applications where you realize later on you want to change the functionality. So we're just going to change the functionality. So I'm just going to roll with this, and so I can show you how you can generate your application. So there's two ways to do this. We could either do mix ecto gen migration, and then we could create a migration name. So this one could be like add or like comment has user. And if we do that, then it would create the setup of our migration file. So we can do that. We can run that command and it'll just create an empty little schema here for us. And then what we can do is we can kind of steal some of this code that was here for us before. And I'll just take all of this, come in here to this new migration file. We don't need to create the table. We need to alter the table. So we're going to alter the comments table. We are just going to alter it so that we have a user ID, and we are going to have that user ID reference the users. And on delete, we'll do nothing. Sure, we'll take that. And we don't need to add timestamps the second time. So we're just modifying this migration file. So there's two ways to do this. I said there's 2 ways to do this. The first way is to generate this migration file. The other way is to just come in here to the previous one and just like copy and paste this one. We could just add the user story in hindsight. And then what we would do is we would do like an ecto drop, and then we would just recreate the entire database. But we'll lose all our data that way. So I'm just going to not run that command and avoid that. But just giving you an idea, like you can either modify your previous migration file and then like delete and rebuild your entire application data schema, or you can just do a migration like this, like I'm doing, where I'm just going to alter the table and add it in hindsight. And so now that I have this migration file, I can run mix ecto migrate, and then it will make that migration take place. So that's run. And if we come here to our database and we query our database, we can see that now, in addition to the story ID, we have the user ID. All right, cool. So now we can actually use the user IDs inside the database. But if I come here to our application, let's make sure that it will function now. And it looks like it does function. If we run test here and we save it. Okay, so it's saving again. I don't think that's saving the user ID though. Let's see. All right, so it's not saving the user ID. So we just need to pass the user ID of the person that makes the comment. So what we can do is we can go to our show module here, and let's go to the Heeks file. And when the comment is being made, let's see, we're going to need the current users. So we're going to do current user ID, and we can just grab that from the current user, and we can allow them to have their ID here. So let's see if that works. If we come over here, classic, current user not found. All right, so let's take a look at our routes. This is good stuff to know. So if we come into our route, we previously had put this here to be publicly accessible. And now what we can do is we can take this, and we have another. So I probably shouldn't have put it here. I think I did that quickly while I was trying to talk and present the tutorial. But this is, I guess, a good lesson as well. So you don't want to have your show route here. If we want to be able to access the current user at this scope, we're going to need to put it behind this one, which mounts the current user. So this endpoint will ensure that it still mounts the current user's ID. So I don't need this route anymore. So I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to come back here and see if this will load now. And it does. And that's because now that current user is available on this page. And so I guess the only other concern that we should think about is if so let's just test this really quickly actually, and then I'll highlight the concern. So if we do test 2 and we hit save, this should save the user's ID now to the database. So let's go back here and let's select from the comments. No, it's still not storing it. Okay, so we have to modify, oh yes, inside the form component of our comment, we're going to need to store that user ID. So just like we store the story ID, we need to store the current user ID. And actually this is just going to be user ID in our form. And we are going to preload it. We're going to store the value as the current user ID. So you can see how I work through the application. Obviously I'm forgetting a couple steps, and it's okay. This is how you work when you're coding. It's just one little step at a time until we get the user ID to save. So let's see here. The user ID is still not saving. So we may need to inspect this. Let's see what does our change set currently look like though for our comments. If we go to our comments, I think that's the problem. So in order if you remember from the Ecto lessons, if you took the Ecto lessons course portion, the only way that something will make it to our database is if it's in the change set. So what we want to do is we want to ensure that our user ID is passed in the change set, and we can also make that required. Well, yeah, we can make it required because we don't want a person to make a comment anonymously, so we can ensure that it's required. All right, so let's try this. So this is going to be test number 4. And now that should finally have the user stored in there. There it is. So we went through a lot of So I'm making that bigger because we went through a lot of tests in our comments to make this work. But now this works. So we have our user ID stored inside of our comments table. So the user ID is not necessarily the user that made the story. The user ID is whoever's logged in. So whoever's logged in and makes a comment here is going to make it. So I'm currently logged in at test.test.com. So if I come over here and I say select everything from users, you can see that test@test.com is user 2, which is the user that made the comment here on this comment, on this story, the story number 2. And you can see that it is in fact story number 2. So I know that I kind of walked through the steps and I kind of debugged this in real time as I walked through and created the application to get the user ID of the currently logged in user to store inside of the comment. But I hope that it was helpful. If I just go ahead and I just throw all the code in here and I run it and it works perfectly and I look like a hero, sometimes that's not the best approach. Sometimes it's good just to see how I solve it in real time. Because you can see, I test it out, it doesn't work, and we see, okay, well, there's a missing piece. To recap on what we did, we have to drive the currently logged in user's ID all the way down here into the database and save it into our database. And so the way that we do that is inside of our router, the mount current user endpoint will ensure that the user that is currently logged in gets stored inside of the socket, and then it will pass it into the route that we have inside of these scopes. And then that currently logged in user inside of our show heeks file here can then be accessible here to then pass the currently logged in user's ID to the comment live form component. So we passed that in and we gave it the name current user ID. And then we drive that into the form component. So that way the form component can store it as a hidden value that will affect the form's user ID. And the user ID, that'll go through a whole bunch of other stuff that's auto-generated here that we walked through in one of our previous lessons for the similar form for the story form, so I'll gloss over that. But this user ID, you can trust the magic of Phoenix LiveView generators to set up all that functionality for you. And this user ID will make it into our comments change set, where we allow it to be in the change set by specifying that it will cast the user ID. And we also just decided to make it required because we don't want users to be able to make anonymous comments. So congratulations, now you have comments that are displaying in real time as we make them to the page. So if we save it, then it gets added to the page. And it also now, when we save those, if we grab the comments, we can see that the comments, which we now have a ton of these, the comments though, will now display the user's ID that makes the comment here in our database. But there is one issue that I realized while I was coding this that I wanted to demonstrate, which is the question now becomes, if we look at our router here, I'm concerned that when the user is not logged in, it's going to try to mount their currently logged in user's ID. And I'm concerned that what happens when somebody tries to leave a comment when they're logged out. So let's try that. So let me just log out here. And now when I come into one of our stories and I try to read it, I'm getting an error. So it's saying that the ID is not found, and it's telling us that it's complaining about that user ID. So this is exactly what I was concerned about. So let's fix that really quickly. We can make sure that if we're not logged in, we can't leave comments. So we'll just hide that comment form. So what we can do to fix this is we can just come inside of the show HTML heeks here, and we can just make this conditional. So basically you cannot leave a comment if you are not logged in. So we'll just go ahead and we'll just say if there is a current user, then do the stuff inside of this code. Otherwise, we just won't render that form out. And so if current user, do everything inside of here, and then end. And that's it. Okay, great. So now we can come into here and we can read. So we can still see the comments generate here as long as there's comments. So story 29 has comments currently. So I can read comments there, but I cannot leave a comment. So this is looking better. Then if we log in, we should be able to leave a comment. So let's see if we log in, if we can leave a comment. So I've logged back in, and now if I come here, I can leave a comment again. And let's see if that renders, and it does. Perfect. If I refresh the page, it's still there. So everything is working now. So now if we are logged out, we basically just can't leave a comment. So you have to be logged in to leave comments, and we store those users that are logged in, we store those into the database so that they are now stored with the comment. So the comments are associated with stories, and they're associated with the user that made it. So this is really, really looking good. And so now the next step, ideally, is we would want to display the user who makes the comment. So let's see what happens if we try to do that. So let's go over here and let's just have the title here where it says comment. We could just have that say, we could just say that like comment by, and then in here, we'll do the comments user. And we want the user's name. So let's just go ahead and change this. And let's see how that looks. And then we get a big error here. So when we try to render out the comment, the user that's associated with the comment and that person's name, we get another association error saying that the user is not loaded. So how do we do this one? This is actually a really interesting problem. And so we are trying to go from the comment here, the comment schema, to the user and to display the user's name. So we have to go from here to the user, and then our user is inside of our accounts, and then we want to get the name. Well, what we can do, if we go back to our stories context here, we're getting the stories, we are currently grabbing the user that's associated with the story, and that is different than the user that is associated with the comment. So don't get this confused. So the story has a user, right? The story has a user who makes the story, and then the comments have their own users who make the comment. So what we need to do is we need to actually additionally preload the user who is related to the comment. So what happens if after we load the comments, we then try to preload the user? Let's see if it's able to find it now. Well, that doesn't work. So as you can see, we found ourselves in an interesting conundrum, right? How do we load the user that's associated with the comments? This is getting really kind of confusing now, right? So stories, we need to preload the user, and we also want to preload the users that are from the comments. So this is a really, really good example, and this is something that I'm really happy I can demonstrate here in this tutorial because this is really kind of tricky. All you have to do, though, it's actually really simple. When you're preloading here, instead of preloading the user, what you're going to do, and this doesn't need to be a list because we're just going to grab one item this time. We're going to preload the comments. So we're going to preload the comments user. So all you have to do is say that this is actually preloading the comments user. And we don't want to use a variable. We want to use an atom. There we go. So we're going to preload the comments user. So this is a little bit tricky. So let's go ahead and see if this works now. And it says name not nil. Okay, so I think this is actually working. I think the reason, because it says here that this time it was able to get the user, but it can't get the name. I think this is working, and I think the issue is because our database here, some of these people do not have a user. So let's fix that. What I'll do is I'll just go ahead, just to prove that concept, is I'll come in here to where we render out the comments, and I'll just say if they have a user, then we can display it. So for each one of these comments, I'll say title, and I will say if there's a comment user, then we will do the displaying of the comment by. So if comment user, then we will do the comment by username, and we can put our text here. So comment by. All right, so now title, comment by, if user, do comment user name. And if this is not true, else we can have it say anon, and then we can end it here. So actually, we could actually support anonymous comments if we wanted to. So yeah, these are all commented by anon, and this will be a test one. It'll say that it's created by test user now. So now we're getting the names. So actually, if we want to, we could support anonymous comments. So right now, if I log out, we currently do not allow people to leave comments. So on story 29 here, we have some old anonymous comments here to this comment here. We could, in theory, actually allow people that are logged out to leave a comment. And the way that we would do that is we would just remap this current user ID here. What we could do is we could take this and we could turn this into a different variable. So current user ID, and when we mount our page here, what we could do is we could come in here and we could say the current user ID is equal to, so if there's a socket assigns that has our current user, then we'll get then what we'll do is we'll get the name. So we'll say socket, we'll just take this socket assigns current user's name. And then what we'll do, if we don't have that, then instead of ending this, we can do else. What we're going to do is we are actually just going to set the user to nil, which will effectively make them anonymous. And then we'll need to assign the current user ID to our socket. And let me just double check current user ID. That looks to match. Okay, so if we come back here, what we could do now is we could go back here and we could re-enable this form. And if I test this, test as an anonymous comment. And it says it can't be blank. Okay, so what that's referring to is that's really cool. So we actually have validation that's requiring that the user ID be set. So that's pretty cool. We could actually remove that from being a requirement though if we wanted to support anonymous comments. And now if attempt again as an anonymous user, and we'll hit save. And now we can leave anonymous comments. And then if we log back in, we can leave comments as users. So let's log back in and let's test that leaving. So this is comment by test@test.com, and we'll hit save. And now it's saying it's invalid. So what's invalid? Let's see. So it tried to store the string test user as user ID. Yeah, so was that a typo? I think that was a typo on my part because we don't want to store, yeah, so the current user ID shouldn't be name, it should be ID, right? Should be ID. So test as test@test.com. Save comment. So now it says comment by test user, and we log out and we leave an anonymous comment. So anon message 123, hit save, and now it's anonymous. So you can actually do whichever you want. In theory, you can make your application work however you want. So I'm just kind of fooling around at this point, I suppose, and just showing that you can have your application either support anonymous comments or not support anonymous comments and enforce that they have to leave a comment. So I guess I flip-flopped on the functionality there. Let's take a look at what medium.com does. If I go to medium.com and I log out and I come to a story here and I try to leave a comment, it's going to definitely try to log me in. So I can't leave a comment on medium.com unless I'm logged in. So that's kind of the way I figured it would be. So yeah, you could actually make this function either way. So interesting stuff here for sure. I think that the code that we added here is probably only going to benefit you more by leaving it, because if you wanted to have this enforce users being logged in, you could do that either way. So here's what I'll do. I don't want to. I think that the code that I added actually adds more to this application. You get to see more functionality. Actually, if I delete this, you'll lose the functionality. So what I can do is I can just reinforce that you need to be logged in to leave a comment, but I can leave all that other functionality to support anonymous comments still. And the way that I can do that is I can just very simply here go back and add that check. So I can say, if, in this case, I'll have it say current user ID. I will use this variable. So if current user ID is not nil, then we're going to do this code inside of here. And then we will end our code right here. So if you want to support anonymous comments, then you can. So now if we come back to our application and we're logged out, we cannot leave comments. So you now have the ability to simply, inside of your show HTML heeks that's associated with your story live, you can just go ahead and delete these 2 lines of code that I have here to leave comments if you want to allow anonymous comments. Or what you can do is you can just leave those lines in here if you want to enforce that only authenticated and logged in users can go ahead and leave comments. But we've built out the little functionality here that will support that. And the only thing that we did is we did make it so that it's not required that the user ID be present when leaving a comment. So that is one thing to consider. If you really wanted to support that a user has to be logged in to leave a comment, then I would definitely put the user ID here just to be safe, because that'll be one extra safety measure to ensure that somebody doesn't try to do something malicious and get it through to your database. All right, so that is it for this lesson. I know that we kind of showed multiple ways of being able to leave a comment whether you are logged in or not. That kind of came out naturally because we had made some comments before where our comments did not have user IDs. So early on in our testing of our application, you can see when we couldn't have our user ID make it to the database, we basically essentially have a bunch of leftover anonymous comments. Now what we could do is we could have deleted these from the database, but it kind of naturally led to us building that functionality to either support anonymous comments or not support them. So we kind of ended up with kind of a really cool additional code that we added to here. So you now understand how you could support and enforce that somebody must leave a comment when logged in or leave anonymous comments, and you can pick and choose, and maybe you can use that in some future applications that you build as well. So I'll go ahead and leave that code in here so you can explore those options on your own. All right, so I'll see you over in the next lesson. In the next lesson, what we're going to do, we have actually all of our functionality for our application built out. We can come in here when I'm not even logged in right now, and I can read others users' stories and read the comments that people made on those stories. And if we log back in now, and we can also log in, so I'll log in as test.test.com, and I can come into here and edit my own stories. I can edit my stories and I can save them. I can also delete them, and it doesn't matter if I want to create a new one and somebody now leaves a comment on my new story. So if somebody was to read this and leave a comment, if there's a comment here, I can still go and delete these. We had to overcome that challenge before. So there's all this functionality built into here to our application. And essentially we have an application which functions like medium.com now. So our application does not have a really fancy UI or anything like that, but in terms of functionality, this really does function exactly like medium.com. You can log in, create your own stories, edit, modify, and delete those, and you can go into other users' stories and comment on them. So we have an application that functions like medium.com, although it doesn't look perfectly like that. So in the next lesson, what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and show you, well, how do you actually make your application look pretty? And how do you modify it so that it doesn't look like the default code that Phoenix LiveView gives to you out of the box? So I'll show you how you can modify that, and it's really simple, and it gets you into using Tailwind CSS. All right, so I'll see you over in the next lesson where we will just kind of jazz up our application a little bit. But you've actually built out all of the functionality of a medium.com like clone. So functionality wise, congratulations, you basically have medium.com right now. So all you have to do is just kind of make it look pretty and design it any way that you want it to. So in the next lesson, let's go ahead and let's modify the design of our code a little bit. All right, I'll see you over in the next lesson.